Shen Yue was a successful professional artist, known for her stunning paintings and captivating stage presence. With numerous exhibitions and awards under her belt, she was hailed as one of the most talented young artists of her generation, and her work was highly sought after by collectors and art enthusiasts. However, behind her success, there were people who envied her and sabotaged her work. They resented her talent, her beauty, and her fame. They spread rumors about her, trying to tarnish her reputation and undermine her confidence. One night, on her way home from a particularly grueling rehearsal, someone tampered with her car, causing an accident that left her hospitalized and unable to walk. The incident shook Shen Yue to her core, leaving her feeling vulnerable and helpless. As Shen Yue struggled to come to terms with her new reality, her behavior began to change. She became withdrawn and isolated, pushing away her friends and family. She stopped answering phone calls, stopped attending social events, and stopped leaving her house. Her assistant, Jane, was the only one who remained by her side, trying to care for her and manage her affairs. Jane was a kind and patient woman who had been with Shen Yue since the beginning of her career. She was deeply concerned about Shen Yu's well-being, and she did everything in her power to help her recover. Shen Yu's parents had passed away, leaving her their wealth and a sprawling mansion. However, their absence had left a gaping hole in Shen Yu's life, and she felt lost and alone. Her yaya and guards had left their jobs because they couldn't handle her attitude, leaving only Jane to care for her. Dylan Wang, on the other hand, came from a poor but loving family. He was the eldest son, and his parents had sacrificed everything to give him and his siblings a better life. Dylan was willing to do anything to support his family, and when his father fell ill, he went to Beijing to find work. Dylan's search for a job led him to Shen Yu's household, where Jane was desperate to find someone to care for her employer. Despite Shen Yu's bad reputation, Dylan was hired because of his intelligence, hard work, and experience. Her career had been on a steady rise. On his first day, Dylan tried to help Shen Yue walk, but she was unwilling and rude. She rejected his assistance, preferring to rely on her wheelchair instead. Dylan was taken aback by Shen Yu's behavior, but he refused to give up. Despite Shen Yu's attitude, Dylan continued to work hard and care for her. He helped her with her physical therapy, assisted her with her daily needs, and even tried to engage her in conversation. However, Shen Yue remained aloof, refusing to acknowledge Dylan's efforts. As the days turned into weeks, Dylan began to feel frustrated. He had never met anyone as difficult as Shen Yue, and he didn't know how to reach her. He tried everything he could think of, from being kind and patient to being firm and assertive. However, nothing seemed to work. One day, Dylan reached his limit. Shen Yue had been particularly cruel, ridiculing him in front of Jane and the other staff members. Dylan decided that he had had enough and handed in his resignation. Jane tried to convince Dylan to stay, promising that Shen Yue would change her ways. However, Dylan was unconvinced. He returned to his province, where his family was struggling to make ends meet. Dylan's father's condition worsened, and the family's financial situation became increasingly dire. Dylan found a new job, but it wasn't enough to support his family. He felt helpless, watching his father suffer and his family struggle. Meanwhile, back in Beijing, Shen Yu's behavior continued to deteriorate. She became increasingly isolated, refusing to see anyone or do anything. Jane tried to reach out to Dylan, asking him to return to Shen Yu's household, but he refused. As the months dragged on, Shen Yu's health began to decline. She stopped taking care of herself, stopped eating properly, and stopped exercising. She became weak and frail, and her once beautiful face became pale and gaunt. Jane was at her wit's end. She didn't know what to do, and she felt helpless watching Shen Yue destroy herself. She tried everything she could think of, from hiring new staff members to trying different therapies. However, nothing seemed to work. Eventually, Dylan agreed to return, but only if his salary was doubled. Jane agreed, desperate to find someone to care for Shen Yue. Dylan returned to Beijing, determined to make the best of the situation. As Dylan settled back into his routine, he began to notice changes in Shen Yue. She was still aloof, but he caught glimpses of a deeper vulnerability. He realized that beneath her tough exterior, Shen Yue was hurting. Shen Yu's behavior slowly began to change. As she spent more time with Dylan, she learned. As Shen Yue spent more time with Dylan, she began to open up to him. She told him about her past, about her parents and her childhood. She told him about her fears and her insecurities, and Dylan listened with kindness and compassion. Dylan, in turn, told Shen Yue about his own life. He told her about his family and his struggles, and Shen Yue listened with interest and empathy. For the first time in months, Shen Yue felt a sense of connection with someone, and it felt amazing. As the days turned into weeks, Shen Yue and Dylan grew closer. They started to enjoy each other's company, and they found themselves looking forward to their daily conversations. Shen Yue started to feel like herself again, and Dylan was happy to see her smile. But despite their growing closeness, Shen Yue still had her moments of darkness. She would get angry or frustrated, and Dylan would have to calm her down. He would remind her of her strengths and her accomplishments, and he would encourage her to keep moving forward. One day, Shen Yue had a particularly bad day. She woke up feeling anxious and overwhelmed, and she couldn't shake off the feeling. She tried to paint, but her brush strokes were clumsy and uncertain. She tried to practice her music, but her notes were sour and off-key. Dylan saw that Shen Yue was struggling, and he tried to help her. He sat with her, listening to her concerns and offering words of encouragement. He reminded her of her past successes, and he urged her to keep pushing forward. But despite Dylan's efforts, Shen Yue couldn't shake off her doubts. She felt like she was failing, like she was losing her touch. She felt like she was disappointing everyone, including herself. Just when Shen Yue thought things couldn't get any worse, she received some devastating news. Her art studio had been vandalized, and all of her paintings had been destroyed. Shen Yue was heartbroken, and she felt like her world was crashing down around her. Dylan saw Shen Yue's distress, and he immediately sprang into action. He called the police, and he reported the vandalism. He then turned to Shen Yue, and he offered her his support. "I'm so sorry, Shen Yue," Dylan said, his voice filled with compassion. "But we'll get through this together. We'll rebuild your studio, and we'll create new art. You're not alone. Shen Yue, I'm here for you." Shen Yue looked at Dylan, and she felt a surge of gratitude. She realized that Dylan was right. She wasn't alone. She had him, and she had his support. Together, Shen Yue and Dylan started to rebuild her studio. They worked tirelessly day and night to create a new space for Shen Yue's art. They designed the studio, they painted the walls, and they installed new equipment as they worked. Shen Yue started to feel like herself again. She started to see the beauty in her art, and she started to believe in herself. She realized that she wasn't a failure, and she wasn't alone. Finally, after weeks of hard work, the studio was complete. Shen Yue stood back, and she admired her handiwork. She felt proud, she felt accomplished, and she felt grateful. "Thank you, Dylan," Shen Yue said, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you. You're my rock, my support. I don't know what I would do without you." Dylan smiled, and he hugged Shen Yue tightly. "You'll never have to find out," he said. "I'll always be here for you." Shen Yue, forever and always. As they hugged, Shen Yue felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that she had found her soulmate in Dylan, and she knew that she would never let him go. And so, Shen Yue and Dylan lived happily ever after. They built a life together, filled with love, art, and music. They supported each other, they encouraged each other, and they loved each other with all their hearts. Years went by, and Shen Yue's art studio became a sensation. People came from all over to see her paintings, and she became known as one of the greatest artists of her time. Dylan was by her side every step of the way, supporting her, encouraging her, and loving her. He became her manager, her confidant, and her partner in every sense of the word. Together, Shen Yue and Dylan proved that love can conquer all. They proved that with hard work, determination, and a little bit of faith, anything is possible, and they lived happily ever after.